welcome. Thank you so much for being here at our webinar today. We are so excited to have you here and to hear from Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. Before we get started, I just want to invite you to join our other webinars. This is our third of 6 in our Climate Solutions webinar series. You can head to creationcare.org/webinars to view our previous webinars and to sign up for previous ones. So now I would love to introduce my colleague, our newest team member here at the Evangelical Environmental Network, Dr. Jessica Moorman. She is a PhD in Earth and Atmospheric Sciences, and she lives in the DC area. Jessica, take it away.
Great, thanks Tori for that introduction. And again, thank you for everyone for joining us today for our webinar of exploring what is God's creation telling us, Climate Science 101 with our distinguished speaker, Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. So glad to have you, Dr. Hayhoe, and everyone with us. And before we begin our webinar, I do want to bless our time together in prayer. So if you could all please join me. Father God, we just thank you that you are our creator God. We thank you that you are a good father. And we thank you that you have given us this awesome task, entrusting all that you have made into our hands to be good stewards of your precious creation and all the people in it, Lord. I pray that you bless our time together. I pray that you give us ears to hear, hearts to receive, and your divine insight. I pray that you give us new revelation as we hear from Dr. Hayhoe, as we discuss together as a body of Christ, the content that Dr. Hayhoe presents and the things that you prompt in our spirit. And so we invite you into this conversation. We bless you and we thank you. Amen. Amen. Great. Well, again, thank you all for joining us for this third installment of our webinar series. We are hosting this webinar series in response to the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, their report that was released earlier this month, addressing solving the climate crisis. And through these webinar series, we are exploring what is our response as Christians and as the church to the climate crisis. But first off, if you aren't familiar with the Evangelical Environmental Network, we represent over 5 million pro-life Christians who have acted to ask their leaders to ensure that we have clean water, clean air, and a stable climate for our families, our children, and our communities. At EN, we have a vision for a world with abundant life for all, where we are free from the burden of pollution, where all creation exists in right relationship, and that our children have a hope and expectation for a healthy and vibrant future. And we exist as an organization to inspire, equip, and educate our fellow evangelical Christians to love God and love our neighbor by reclaiming and rediscovering that biblical mandate to be good stewards of creation and to work together, co-labor with Christ for a stable climate and a healthy, pollution-free world. And here at EN, we truly believe that this shouldn't be a partisan issue, and it should be recognized for what it is, a moral issue and a kingdom of God issue. And it's an issue that we truly can't wait any longer to address. And that's why we commend the release of the Select Committee's report on solving the climate crisis. This report outlines 12 pillars for action, and we see these pillars and recommendations as an excellent starting point for a much needed bipartisan conversation that will address how do we protect the most vulnerable in our communities, in our nation and across the world, who unfairly suffer the worst impacts of pollution and an unstable climate, while also unfairly they contributed to it the least. Also looking at how recommendations can also help us pass down a cleaner, safer, and healthy future for our children and generations to come. And I always like to think about climate solutions and environmental solutions as not just one single solution to a problem. This is such a pervasive problem that we can't just look to one solution, but instead I like to think of it as a buffet of solutions that, according to our values and who we as Christians are called by God to serve, picking from those solutions that best fit our values, our callings, and our giftings, that are tailored to the needs of our communities and the people that God has entrusted to us. And so I really see this report as a great starting point, outline a full menu of different options that we can connect with and begin to form a bold plan that our nation truly needs. So today, one thing that you guys might be wondering though is global warming truly a crisis? This may be a question that you yourself are asking, or that your friends, your coworkers, your family, maybe your fellow church members have been asking. Is climate change, is global warming truly a crisis, like we've heard? And to answer this, we need to look no further than God's creation. We also need to have the ears to hear and the hearts to receive the ever accumulating reports from those who have already been affected by the impact. And answering this question, is climate change a crisis, is something that I myself, and I feel comfortable speaking for Dr. Hayhoe, as a task and a calling, you could even say a burden that God has given both of us to do. For me, science is simply the study of God's creation. And I became a scientist, and specifically a climate scientist, because of my faith, because of my relationship with Christ. As a young Christian, giving my life over to God and saying, God, what will you have me do? How can I join you in advancing your kingdom here on earth, of bringing heaven to earth? This is what he said, and this is where he led. He led me to climate science and helping contribute to solve one of, if not the most pressing problem of our time. And I remember a moment when I was truly prompted by the Holy Spirit, and when God revealed to me how I could live out Jesus's greatest commandment that he offers to us in Matthew chapter 22, verse 37, where he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And for me, the Spirit led me and revealed to me that I could do that by studying climate science and looking for solutions to global warming. And it really is a moment where I truly experienced firsthand, be careful what you ask God. Be careful in telling him that you'll do anything in his service, because he'll usually surprise you with the answer. But with that, it led me to becoming a paleoclimatologist. And that is just a long-winded way of saying that I study what Earth's climate was like in the past, before we had weather stations, using God's creation, using the rock record to search out clues for what it can tell us about how rainy or how hot it was in the past. And using this information, we can determine one of the key questions that I was in my research seeking to answer. Is the climate change we see today, is this just part of a natural cycle in Earth's climate? Or do we as humans have something to do with it? What is our role in this? And at risk of not giving too many spoilers for Katharine's talk, I'll just say that creation does reveal that it's not natural and it's us. But to tell us more about what God's creation reveals to us about our current crisis and our role in it as humans and as Christians, it's my honor and my pleasure to introduce Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. She is the Director of Climate Science of the Climate Science Center at Texas Tech. She's the lead author of the National Climate Assessment, which I can tell you is the premier source of our most robust information about how climate change is impacting the United States. She was named a UN Champion of the Earth, and she's a fellow evangelical married to a pastor, which I know is no easy task. And I'm truly honored to call her a friend and a mentor. And with that, Dr. Hayhoe, let me give you the floor.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to speak with you today and to be part of this series of webinars. If you've missed some of the past webinars, I encourage you to go watch them. All of these are being recorded and archived because they address everything from how can your church be more efficient and effective with its money and its carbon, to how do we talk to other people, and especially how do we engage with our kids on climate change. So as a climate scientist, I'm going to talk about how do we know this thing is real. And what I want to do is I want to ask you questions as well as allow you to ask me questions. So I'm going to share my screen with you here, just a minute. Okay. And what I want you to do is I want you, if you're listening on your computer or your phone, I want you to go to pollev.com/myname. Make sure you spell it right. It's got 2 A's in it. So pollev.com/Katharine, or you can go to pollev.com and put in Katharine. It might ask you for your name. Don't worry, you can just skip that part. And then when you do, the first thing that's going to come up is this map. And I want you to go ahead and take your finger and click, or your mouse if you're on your computer, click where you are joining us from today. If you are outside the US, and I am very sensitive to this being a Canadian myself, go ahead and click off the map in the direction that you are joining from. So if I see anybody out in the ocean, that will be not that you're on a ship, but you're actually joining from a different place. Okay, it looks like we have at least one person from Ontario. That's great. And oh, Texas, excellent. California, Arizona, a few from the Midwest, more out southeast, northeast, excellent. Okay. You're getting the hang of this. Oh, 2 from Texas. Nice. Washington State. All right. Indiana. Excellent. Okay. All right. So I'm going to be asking you some questions as we go along using the same tool. And then at the end, you're going to be able to use this tool to ask me questions. So keep that window open. Today, I'm going to talk about 4 questions. And the only reason we have to ask these questions today is not because the science is not certain. In fact, we've known the answer to many of these questions for a long time. It's because climate change is the most politically polarized issue in the entire United States. It is the issue on which people are most divided depending on their political ideology. And the fact that the answers that we have to these questions tend to depend not on how educated we are or how much science we know. They depend simply on where we fall on the political spectrum. But does God's creation give us a different answer depending on how we vote? Of course not. We as Christians believe in objective truth. And so what I'm going to do today is I want to unpack the answers to these 4 questions. Is climate changing? Are humans responsible? Why does it matter? And what can we do about it? Looking at what is actually happening in this world. So now I'm going to ask you another question. Ready? And this one you just have to pick a letter. This question is, which of these 4 questions that we're going to talk about today do you feel least able to answer? Question number 1 is climate changing. Enter A. B, are humans responsible? C, why does it matter? D, what can you do about it? E, all of these questions and a few more. And then F, none of these questions. I'm ready to give the webinar myself. I am delighted to see that we have a lot of people answering F, and that is great. I'm not sure why you're here, maybe just to get a few extra tips, but it's excellent that you already feel equipped to go out and tell people the answers to these questions. It looks like the second place is what can you do about it? And then we have why does it matter? And a few people wondering why is climate changing and are humans responsible? All right, I'm going to try to answer all of these questions for you. And for those of you who feel like you already know the answers, hopefully you'll pick up a few things and a few thoughts that you might not have used before. Here we go. Question number 1, is climate changing? Here's the thing. Every time we have a heat wave, people say, oh, it must be global warming. And then every time we have a cold wave, I don't know if you remember back in May, but it snowed in a lot of places in the Northeast and Southern Ontario back in May. Every time we have a cold wave, people say, hey, where's global warming now? The problem is that we don't often understand the difference between climate and weather. Weather is what happens in a certain place at a certain time. A heat wave, a cold wave, a flood, a storm, a drought. It's like a single tree. Climate, on the other hand, is like a whole forest of trees. It's the long-term average of weather over at least 20 to 30 years. So when we say, is climate changing, we can't just look to a single event to make a decision on whether it is or not. We have to understand that with weather, we can have hot and cold and wet and dry. But climate is the long-term average of that weather over at least 20 to 30 years, and it's the statistics of that weather. It's how frequently we have a heat wave, how long that heat wave is, how intense that heat wave is. Those statistics are climate. So the questions that we need to ask are this. First of all, is our long-term average changing? Is it going up or down? And then second, are the statistics of our weather extremes changing? Not did we have a heat wave, but in general, over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, are heat waves getting more frequent or stronger or more intense? And what's happening to other types of changes too? The answer to both of these questions, in most cases, is yes. But I'm going to walk you through a few of those. Here we go. Now, the National Climate Assessment that Jessica referred to is a fantastic resource for this information. If you want to take a screenshot of this, you can go ahead or a picture with your phone or just write down that web address. It's a very long document, but you don't have to read it like a novel. There's no plot to it. You just go and you find the chapter that you're interested in for the region you live in, and that's what you read. I'm going to give you a couple of highlights from this document, though. First of all, we know that global temperature is increasing. From year to year, it might go up and down. That's weather. But decade by decade by decade, it is steadily ticking upwards. That is climate. We know not only that thermometers are telling us this, but all kinds of indicators in God's creation, whether it's retreating glaciers, melting sea ice, the date on which our plants and trees are blooming earlier in the year, the fact that invasive species like ticks are moving northward as our winters get warmer. If we look in God's creation, we see a total of 26,500 independent lines of evidence, not thermometers, not satellites, not scientific observations, but evidence that we can see with our own eyes that yes, the planet is getting warmer. We know that it's getting warmer in the United States, and it's getting much warmer in certain places and in the winter. It's interesting, in the South, it's actually getting more humid. So if you just look at temperature as opposed to heat index, you don't see the whole picture. We know that wherever we live, we are vulnerable to very expensive weather and climate disasters. And if we live in Texas, we get more of these than any other state in the United States. And we know that this is just part of life on this planet. We can always roll a double six on our dice. That's our extreme events. But as climate changes, it's like it's sneaking in and taking one of those numbers and changing one of those numbers into another 6, and then another 6, and then even a 7. So all of a sudden, we're rolling more and more frequent extreme events in some cases because of a changing climate. Like what? Well, first of all, we know that when the air is warmer, it holds more water vapor. So when a storm comes along, as it always does naturally, there's more water vapor for that storm to sweep up and dump on us today than there was 50 or 100 years ago. So what happens is we're seeing more frequent heavy rainfall in a warmer world. The biggest increases have been in the Northeast and the Midwest, but we see them across most of the country. That is one of the ways that climate change is loading the weather dice against us. Extreme precipitation isn't just about the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere. Certain types of storms are also getting stronger, specifically atmospheric rivers and hurricanes, which they call typhoons or cyclones, depending on where else you live in the world. If you live along the coasts, you know about these storms. Atmospheric rivers hit the west coast of North America and dump huge amounts of rain. If you live along the Gulf Coast or the Atlantic coast, you know what a hurricane looks like. They dump a lot of rain too. Well, these storms are powered by warm ocean waters, and the oceans are getting a lot warmer. In fact, jumping ahead a little bit, over 90% of the extra heat that's being trapped inside the climate system by the blanket we're wrapping around our planet, made up of heat-trapping gases, over 90% of that heat is going into the ocean, not the atmosphere. That's a lot of heat to power stronger storms. And so we're seeing that not only do these storms have more rainfall associated with them, which of course is because the air holds more water vapor, but because they're powered by warmer oceans, they are intensifying faster. We don't see the overall number changing, but of the storms we get, more of them are stronger. They're moving more slowly, they're bigger. They're extending further northward, stronger. And we've got sea level rising too. What else is happening? Well, as you might expect, heat waves are becoming more frequent and cold waves are becoming less frequent. We know that cold temperature records are still being broken today by the handful, but we're breaking many times more heat records than cold records. And we know that we are seeing heat waves that are a lot more frequent than we should expect. For example, last summer, Europe suffered yet another extreme heat wave. And it turns out that they have had 500-year heat waves in 15 years. Talk about the dice being loaded against you. You aren't supposed to throw one of those heat waves more than once in 500 years on average. And they had 5 of them in 15 years. That's what I mean by climate change loading the dice against us. We also know that wildfires are not getting more frequent, especially in the US, where they're mostly just due to human ignition, people. But when they come, they're burning greater and greater area. If you think back, it's hard to think back to disasters that happened over 2 years ago, since we're in the middle of a huge unfolding disaster today. But if you cast your mind back to December 2017, that was when the Thomas Fire broke the record for the largest wildfire in California in recorded history. But that record was broken in August 2018, so 8 months later, by the Ranch Fire, and it was smashed in November 2018 by the Camp Fire. And the fires continue today. In November, just this past November, there was another string of horrific wildfires in California. Last year, Alaska had its most expensive wildfire season on record. In Canada, wildfires are causing more and more damage, burning greater and greater area. And I know it's hard to remember, but just in January this year in January, the headlines were full of what? They were full of the incredible wildfires in Australia that were absolutely devastating. It's estimated 1 billion animals were killed, and countless people lost their homes, had their lungs damaged from smoke inhalation, and even died as a result of these wildfires. When we see these extremes happening, the question is not, did climate change cause this event? As if it's just black and white, like, yes, this one was climate change, and no, that one wasn't. No, the question is, did climate change make it worse? That's the question. And this is a topic that's at the forefront of climate science today. It's called extreme event attribution. In other words, how much more frequent did climate change make this event, or how much stronger did it make it, or how much longer or how much more damaging did it make it? And there's an organization, there's an organization called the World Weather Attribution that goes through all of these different events and talks about them. And there's a really good book coming out called Angry Weather. I thought I had it on the next slide, but I forgot I didn't. Angry Weather is a fantastic book that actually explains how scientists do this. It's coming out in September, but you can pre-order it today, and it's very easy to read. So Angry Weather explains the science of attribution, but let me show you a few of the results that we've gotten when we've looked at these. So for example, I was talking about wildfires in California and Australia and Alaska. We know that wildfires are a natural part of the system, right? Wildfires are natural. But we know that with a changing climate, making hotter and drier conditions, we're getting more area burned by wildfires. So without wildfires, for example, in the Western United States, without climate change in the Western United States, we would have seen about 11 or 12 million acres burned since the 1980s by wildfires, naturally. But with climate change loading the dice against us, we have seen double that. With Hurricane Harvey, we know that climate change supercharged it. It increased the amount of rainfall associated with the storm by anywhere from 15 to possibly up to 40%. And the economic damages associated with the storm were significantly larger. It's estimated that could be as much as 3/4 of the damages could be due to human-induced climate change. We already saw how the European heat wave was made much more frequent because of climate change. And I love these words from the Prime Minister of Dominica because they're so, I don't love them because of the content. It's horrific. His island was absolutely decimated by the hurricane season. But these succinctly summarize why climate change matters to us, because to deny climate change today is to deny a truth that people have lived. So now on to question number 2. Okay, we see things changing all around the world. We see 26,500 indicators of a changing climate. We have personally experienced how things are just getting weirder in the places where we live. But how do we know that humans are responsible? Because climate has changed in the past, right? Of course it has. In fact, that's what we climate scientists study. And paleoclimate scientists like Jessica specifically study natural variability in the past. We are the ones who know that it's been warmer before and colder before, and why. So when we see climate changing today, we don't automatically say it has to be humans. What we do is we first check out the natural suspects. Like what? Well, we know that the sun has caused climate to change in the past, and there's been natural cycles too, volcanic eruptions. Could any of these be responsible for our current warming? Let's look at the sun first. Could it be the sun? Turns out, no, it couldn't. Why? Because the sun's energy has been going down the last 50 years or so. At the same time, the Earth's temperature has been going up. So when you turn a dimmer switch on a lamp down, does that lamp get brighter or dimmer? If it's wired the right way, it gets dimmer, right? We can't be warming if the sun's energy has been going down due to the sun. There has to be a different cause. Could it be natural cycles? This is the most popular argument, but often people don't understand how natural cycles work. They work like a teeter-totter or a seesaw. They move heat around the climate system from north to south, east to west, and from the ocean to the atmosphere and back again. So although natural cycles can cause a certain part of the world to get warmer, they do so at the expense of another part. They can't just create heat out of nothing. That would violate conservation of energy, which is one of the laws that explains how the whole universe works. So we know our current warming is not due to natural cycles because every part of the climate system is warming. The ocean, the land surface, all of the frozen areas of the globe, and the atmosphere. Just to give you an example of what a natural cycle looks like, a popular one is the medieval warm period. People always say, well, don't you know that it was warmer before? I mean, they called Greenland green, didn't they? Well, it wasn't because it was green. It was because they wanted people to move there to get out of the overpopulated areas in Scandinavia. And when they arrived there, then they found out it was covered in a giant ice sheet. But it's true that the medieval warm period was slightly warmer than average, but not over the whole world, just over the North Atlantic. In fact, using paleoclimate data of the type that Jessica and her colleagues study, we can see what global temperature looked like in the medieval warm period. Blue is colder than average, red is warmer than average, and you can see a warm spot over the North Atlantic. But look over in Siberia. Was it the medieval warm period in Siberia? No, in fact, It was the medieval cold period in Siberia. So why are we so obsessed with something that we call a medieval warm period? Because most of our culture comes from Western Europe, specifically the UK, where it was a little bit warmer than average. If you want to see what today looks like, this is what today looks like. It looks nothing like a natural cycle. Could we just be getting warmer since the last ice age, people ask? Because we know that there was a very cold period not that long ago, and then it got warmer since then. No, because it turns out that it was very cold, and then warming peaked about 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, right when our society became agriculturalized and people started to build cities and all that kind of stuff. It peaked around then, and since then, we were gradually, slowly cooling, ready to head into the next ice age until something happened just a couple of hundred years ago. And no, it was not a squirrel looking for an acorn that happened. And then lastly, people say, well, don't you know that one volcanic eruption produces more pollution than people do in, insert a number there. People say a year, 5 years, 30 years, 100 years. Unfortunately, none of that is true. Volcanic eruptions primarily cool the earth. They don't warm it. They produce all kinds of particles that act like an umbrella that reflect the sun's energy back to space. So after a big volcanic eruption, the earth is a little bit cooler for anywhere for a couple of weeks, up to maybe 1 or 2 years for a big eruption, not warmer. And although geologic activity, not so much volcanoes, but geologic activity, like, you know, all the bubbling of gases that you get out of the pools at Yosemite Park and things like that, although geologic activity does produce some heat-trapping gases, it's only a tiny fraction of what humans produce, the amount equal to about 3 medium-sized US states per year. If you want more, our Global Weirding series talks about all of these natural factors in the video called This Is All Just a Natural Cycle, right? But we have gone through and we have systematically eliminated every natural factor. Every single one has an excuse. Not only that, but we know why we're warming. It's no mystery. It's because our planet has a natural blanket of heat-trapping gases that's entirely natural. The sun's energy shines down and goes through this blanket like a window, but then the earth heats up and gives off heat energy. And just like a blanket traps your body heat on a cold night, in the same way, this naturally occurring blanket of heat-trapping gases keeps our planet over 60 degrees Fahrenheit or over 30 degrees Celsius warmer than we would be otherwise. Well, if this is natural, and in fact, this blanket is responsible for the fact that we have life on Earth, then what's the problem? The problem is that by digging up and burning coal and gas and oil, we are wrapping an extra blanket of heat-trapping gases around the planet. And just like you would, if somebody snuck in at night and put an extra blanket on you, you'd wake up sweating. In the same way, our planet is starting to run a fever because of this extra blanket that we've wrapped around it. And we've known this for a really long time. Time for you to vote again. Ready? How long have we known that burning fossil fuels produces heat-trapping gases that are wrapping an extra blanket around the Earth? Did we find out when Al Gore released his movie? Did we find out in 1988, which was a famous date when it was a very hot summer, and climate scientist Jim Hansen testified to Congress for the first time saying global warming was real? Did we find out in the 1950s when scientists were first doing the using giant supercomputers to model the planet? Did we find out earlier in the 1900s, or did we find out in the 1850s? All right. I see votes going in here, and I'm going to give you the answer here, which is a very cool answer. And we have a Global Weirding episode on this too, called How Long Have We Known About Climate Change? The answer is indeed the 1850s. We've known about this extra blanket around our planet, or sorry, we've known about the natural blanket around our planet since the work of Fourier. We've known that we humans are adding an extra blanket to our planet, and this extra blanket would warm our planet since the work of John Tyndall and Eunice Foote in the 1850s. We've known how much the planet would warm since the work of Arrhenius in the 1890s. He calculated the first climate model by hand. It took him 2 years. And Guy Callender in the 1930s rode around the world and collected temperature data from weather stations around the world to show that the planet actually was warming. That is how long we've known about this. Isn't that incredible? But now we get to the question that the most people wanted the answer to, or sorry, the second most people wanted the answer to, and that is, why does it matter? I mean, there's so many issues today that are so urgent and so overwhelming. People who can't even feed their families, people concerned about issues of justice and equality, people concerned about the economy, people concerned about their safety and their health. Why does climate change matter? Can't we just push it off and worry about it later? When we look at what people think about climate change, this is one of our biggest issues. The Yale program on climate communication has these fantastic maps that ask people all kinds of questions. If you want to look it up, you just Google Yale climate opinion maps, and these will come right up. You can get results by congressional district, by county, and by riding in Canada. They have Canadian maps too. And anything that's orange means more than 50% of people say yes, and anything that's blue is less than 50% of people say yes. So when they ask people, is it happening? People say yes. Is it going to affect plants and animals? People say yes. So we're okay in general with it happening and affecting plants and animals. Will it harm future generations? Yes. Will it harm people in the US? Ooh, we start to see a bit more blue here. And then they ask this question, ready? Do you think it will harm you? All of a sudden, it's blue across almost the entire country. So this is the bigger problem we have, not do we think it's happening and do we think it's humans? The bigger problem we have is people don't think it matters. If you're wondering who those yellow counties are, turns out one of the most concerned people groups about a changing climate is Hispanic Catholics. Now you might say, well, of course, that's because the Pope wrote that encyclical, right, 5 years ago? No, because the least concerned people group in the entire United States is, you might be ready to say white evangelicals, but nope. By 1 percentage point, white Catholics are the least concerned people group, and then white evangelicals after them. So it isn't the Pope's encyclical that's causing this. It's awareness of how it matters to us. It's not about the polar bear. It's not just about people who live far away, although they are absolutely affected by a changing climate. We are being affected right here and right now, and that's why it matters. Climate change doesn't need to be further up our priority list, as if it's at number 18 or 22, we need to push it up to maybe number 3 or number 2. The only reason we care about a changing climate is because it affects everything already on our priority list. Do you worry about people having enough food to eat? Do you worry about people being able to drink clean water that's not contaminated? Do you worry about people having, being healthy? Do you worry about having an economy where people can get jobs? Do you worry about people being safe? Do you worry about your kids? Do you worry about your family? Do you worry about the place where you live? Do you worry about the future? Almost anything we're already concerned about is affected by a changing climate, and that's why we care whether we realize it or not, because of everything we already care about. So it isn't a case of moving climate change further up our priority list. It's a case of identifying what's already at the top of our priority list and then connecting the dots so we realize how climate change already affects the things that we already care about. That's why we care. The United Nations has published these Sustainable Development Goals that are so basic. A goal of eliminating poverty, eliminating hunger, ensuring good health and quality education, gender equality, clean water for people. And they have down at number 13 climate action, but to be totally honest, I wouldn't even put this on at the list, because you might argue, well, why is it 13? Maybe it should be 15, maybe it should be 5. No, the only reason we care about climate change is because it affects everything already on this list. Climate change is, as the US military calls it, a threat multiplier. It takes the issues we're already worried about and exacerbates them or makes them worse. Like what? Well, for example, Climate change has already increased the economic gap by as much as 25% between the richest and poorest countries in the world. That's not future. It has already happened. What else is happening? Climate change disproportionately affects women and children. Climate change disproportionately affects people who are marginalized and indigenous communities. Climate change, very relevant to our times, disproportionately affects people of color, people who are socioeconomically vulnerable, people whose health is already precarious, people who already live in very polluted areas, as the largest number of Black people in the US do. They live in places that are exposed to air pollution, to water pollution, to soil pollution. Climate change affects all of these issues, and that's why we care about it. I don't just care about racism. I don't just care about gender equality. I don't just care about poverty or hunger. I care about climate change because I care about these things. And as Christians, how much more? So give me a word here, just one word. If you have to use two words, put a dot between them. You'll see why in a minute. So if you have to use two words, make sure you put a dot between your two words. But when it comes to climate change, what are you most worried about climate change making worse? Are you worried that it will affect your health? Are you worried that it will affect poverty? Are you worried that it will affect security? Will it affect our natural places, agriculture, food, water, kids, everything? Yes, absolutely. Breathing, stability, survival, the future, prosperity. See, look at this. Climate change absolutely endangers the polar bears. In fact, a new study just came out recently showing that. But it isn't just about the polar bears, and it isn't just about the future. It's about everything. Who here does not care about their health, no matter where we fall on the political spectrum? The coronavirus pandemic has showed us that in spades. Who doesn't care about having food to eat and water to drink? We can't live without those things. And we need those things to be clean and available to us. No matter who we are, no matter what we care about, we already care about climate change. We just haven't connected the dots. So it isn't a case of making people care about climate change or trying to convince people to care about climate change. No, it's a case of listening to them, having conversations with people, figuring out what already matters to them today, and then connecting the dots to how they already care about climate change. They just didn't realize it. See the difference? So that leads directly into our last question, and get your questions ready because we're going to take a few of them after this too, okay? Our last question is, what can I do about it? So often we feel like we're told to change a light bulb or install a smart thermostat, which I've done, or recycle, which I do. And all of these things do matter and they do make a difference, and we are doing them. This is the encouraging thing. According to the Yale Program in Climate Communication, 32% of us have rewarded companies that we think are doing the right thing. 27% of us have punished companies that we think are doing the wrong thing. Only 4% of us have eliminated animal products or meat from our diet, which is a big way that we can reduce our personal carbon footprint. But 94% of us say that we're willing to eat more fruit and vegetables, which is actually better for our health anyways. But these actions are not enough. They're not enough. Even with all the LED light bulbs that we've replaced, that's only 1.7% of the problem. Even if the entire world went vegan, and in many developing countries, that's not actually possible. Some it is, but not most. Even if the entire world did that, we'd only reduce about 10 to 15% of global emissions. We need system-wide change. And the system-wide change begins with understanding that the biggest problem we have is that we don't think it matters to us, and we don't think there's anything we can do to fix it. And so that's why the single most important thing anybody can do about climate change is this: talk about it. Because it turns out nobody does. Nobody talks about it. And if we don't talk about it, why would we care? And if we don't care, why would we ever act? Why don't we talk about it? because we don't think it matters to us, and we don't think there's anything positive that we can do to fix it. And when climate changes and we get very worried, often our instinct is to share more scary facts with people. Because we say if they're not worried, they should be. So let's tell them how horrible it is and how we're all going to die in 12, no 11, no 10 years if we don't do something about it. That's not true. And the more carbon we produce, the worse it is. But what happens when we share scary data is people reject it even more. Inaction results because, as neuroscientist Tali Shalot says, she says, fear and anxiety cause us to withdraw, to freeze, and to give up rather than taking action. And so climate change is more. This vicious cycle does not work. What does work? What does work is sharing why and how climate change matters in the ways that already matter to us, and what are the positive things that we can do to fix it. So when climate changes and we get worried, break the cycle. Have a positive conversation that, as researcher Matthew Goldberg found, creates a true positive pro-climate feedback loop. Talk about how it matters to us and what we can do to fix it. People feel empowered by that, and action results, breaking the cycle. As neuroscientist Tali Shalot continues, she said, our brain is built to associate forward action with a reward, not with avoiding harm. So we need to reframe our message so the information we provide induces hope, not dread. Hope. Like what? Like talking about why it matters to us, no matter where we fall on the political spectrum, connecting the dots to address psychological distance. We feel like it's far away from us when really it's close to home, and inspiring to address the fact that we don't think there's anything we can do to fix it, because there is. Like what? We can bond over the place where we live, our family, our shared faith, activities we enjoy, things that matter to us. And then once we've connected the dots, we can talk about how there's solutions. Like what? Like airports going carbon neutral, the biggest army base in the US being powered by wind and solar energy. By big companies going carbon neutral and continuing to lead the economy. By churches and faith communities reducing their carbon footprint, saving their energy, increasing their efficiency, putting solar panels in the shape of a cross on their roof. I love that. By coal museums going with clean energy. By airlines powering their flights with clean biofuel. By people, from kids to people in developing countries, revolutionizing their lives with new technology and access to clean energy. By the fact that it's been 6 years since we've been installing more new clean energy around the world than more new fossil fuels. The tide is starting to turn, and we can share this news with people. Project Drawdown is a fantastic resource for positive, constructive climate solutions. If you're wondering what to talk about, just go to Project Drawdown and read any of their articles on climate solutions, and you will have many new things to share with people. We can talk about how we can act individually. Absolutely. Recycling, eating lower down the food chain, light bulbs, solar panels. But we also have to talk about how we can act in community. And there's a great resource called climatecaretakers.org that actually sends you ideas on how we can act together as a community every month. We have to act wisely, as was discussed in the previous webinar just a few days ago, about being good stewards of our resources, which include not just our money, but this planet we've been given. And by talking about it, we can share the good news that there are things we can do about a changing climate. The most effective thing any one of us can do is to have a conversation about why it matters to us and what we can do to fix it. You are the #1 best messenger to do that. You really are, not me, you. Because caring about God's creation, the people and the other living things that are already affected by climate change today, it's who we are. It's what our faith is. It's accepting our responsibility. And the bottom line for me is that it's a true expression of God's love. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Do we have time for a few questions?
We absolutely do, and here's how we're going to do them. I know people have been typing questions into the Q&A. I want you to go to Poll Everywhere and type in your question there. And here's the fun thing. You can upvote the questions that you most want me to answer. We only have about 5 minutes here together to answer questions, so go ahead and type your question in here. And even if you don't have a question, go ahead and upvote the questions that you're most interested in having me answer. All right? Okay. So first question, is it reasonable to suggest a connection between the pandemic and climate change? Guess what? We have 2 global weirding episodes on exactly that. So if you don't mind putting in the chat there, globalweirdingseries.com, just type in the web address. If you click on globalweirdingseries.com, the link will be in the chat, you will see our 2 global weirding episodes explaining how climate change did not cause the coronavirus pandemic, no, but how climate change, being a threat multiplier, absolutely made its impacts on us worse. And one of the most direct impacts is the fact that if we live in an area that's already subject to enormous air pollution, and again, the poorest and most vulnerable people, both here in the US as well as around the world, tend to live in the more polluted areas, we are much more vulnerable to contracting the disease and to suffering from it if our lungs are already vulnerable because of all the air pollution we've been breathing in for years and decades, than if we live in an area with cleaner air. So that's one of the most direct connections between coronavirus, air pollution, fossil fuels, and climate change. So to answer that question, check out our global weirding episodes. We have 2 episodes on climate change and the coronavirus. All right, great questions. What gives you the most hope for the future? So I've turned that question around and I've actually asked people that question because I was curious. And the answer is not more scientific facts and not politics. The answer people give me is learning what other people are doing. So go out and look for those good news stories because people are doing amazing things. Individual people, groups of people, organizations, businesses even, people are doing amazing things, and seeing those things happening gives us hope that yes, we can act together. But ultimately for us as Christians, our hope comes from a bit of a different place. And it's very counterintuitive. In Romans, it talks about hope and it says, it starts with suffering. Suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character produces hope that will not disappoint, because ultimately our hope is placed not in individual people who can and will fail, we all do, but rather our hope is ultimately placed in God. So hope is essential to this because hope is what enables us to move forward. But hope won't come and find us. We have to go and look for it. We have to strive for it. We have to work for it. We have to struggle for it. And that's why being in community is so important, because talking with and interacting with other people is a huge part of what gives us hope. Top question there is a great one for the Evangelical Environmental Network, because Mitch Hescox, the president, has spoken and written very compellingly on how climate change is a pro-life issue, right? I mean, if we care about life, it doesn't end at birth. It doesn't go from conception to birth. Life goes from conception to death, right? And climate change is a pro-life issue. It affects the poorest and most vulnerable people. It disproportionately affects women and children. It affects the unborn. And then you get into pollution, which has an even bigger impact, especially on children and the unborn. So why do people who say that they're pro-life deny climate change? It's not because of the facts, and it's not because of the Bible. It's because of their political ideology. The #1 predictor of whether we agree with the simple facts of what God's creation is telling us is where we fall on the political spectrum. And as Christians, that should not be the case. As Christians, we begin with what we believe, and what we believe informs our ideology. And unfortunately for many of us, we have switched those. So we go first of all with what our political ideology says, and only second with the Bible. And if the two come into conflict, we will go with politics over the Bible and over what God's creation is telling us. But if we truly take the Bible seriously, and that is the definition of an evangelical, if we take the Bible seriously, we will be at the front of the line demanding action on climate change and on pollution, because we know that it affects people and every living thing on this planet. And that is what the Evangelical Environmental Network does so well, and that is what Young Evangelicals for Climate Action does so well also. All right, I think we have time for one last question, and I would encourage you to watch my TED Talk for a further answer to this question, and it is, how do we address the politics? And when people are skeptical of the science, how do you respond to their questions? Well, in my TED Talk and in our global weirding episode, if I just tell them the facts, surely they'll change their mind, right? I talk about how it isn't skepticism of the science. It is politics front and center. And so what we need to do is, by having conversations with people, figure out what really matters to them in addition to politics. If it's only politics, there's plenty of Republicans we can actually quote on climate change. But if there's other things they care about besides politics, like their faith, for example, like their kids, like the place where they live, like their job, if there's other things that they care about, connect the dots. That's how we can overcome political polarization, by bonding over shared values. So give my TED Talk a watch. Check out our Global Weirding series. We have episodes like, what does the Bible say about climate change? If I just tell them the facts, surely they'll change their mind. And then have a conversation with somebody where you begin not by bashing them over the head with more facts, but by listening to them and asking them questions and figuring out what matters to them, and then connect the dots to how climate change is already affecting what they care about today, and then give them a hopeful, positive solution that they can agree with and support, so they realize that it isn't about politics, it's about making a better world for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hayhoe, for this fantastic presentation and wonderful question and answer session. I know you have to run to another webinar, so we will thank you for your time, and have a great day. Everyone else, I have a few closing announcements for you before we leave. So I would love to chat about ways that we can continue to take action, create that systemic change that Dr. Hayhoe talked about. And we had a question just come up in the Q&A about, would a price on carbon be the most effective solution? It is a great step. Part of this climate solutions series is to talk about all the different ways we can work towards solving the climate crisis. And a price on carbon is part of that, but we also know that we need bold, comprehensive action. So you may be asking, what now? We have an action alert specifically designed around this issue. If you head to creationcare.org/action alert, you will find a pre-drafted message and some background information. All you have to do is enter your address, and it will automatically go to both your senators and your representative. Or you can edit the message, add a personal story, and share why you care about this issue. So it's designed to be really easy and help you connect with your legislators to start advocating for climate solutions, and let them know that Christians really care about this issue and want to see them take action right now. And if you want to learn about more climate solutions, please join and share our webinar series. We have 3 more coming up. Next week, we have one with a soil scientist and a scientist who studies oceans and wetlands, and they're going to discuss natural climate solutions. We're going to talk about how we can harness the power of God's creation and use that as one of the tools to help solve the climate crisis. So head to creationcare.org/webinars, and you can watch our previous webinars there as well, and we will be recording and posting this one. Finally, if you want to learn more about Creation Care and some of the things we talked about, check out creationcare.org/resources. So we hope you'll especially take that action alert right now, head to the website and send your message, and we hope to see you on future webinars. Thank you everyone for being here. Have a great day.